Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Removing Barriers to Solar on Schools and Local Governments in Southwest Virginia. On behalf of our partner organization, Southern Environmental Law Center, Generation 180, and Appalachian Voices, my name is Aaron Such, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. I'm going to be joined here by my fellow co-presenters on the webinar here, and we're going to move on to the next slide and talk a little bit more about the format. So I will be joined by Tish Tablan from Generation 180, Hannah Coman from Southern Environmental Law Center, Chelsea Barnes from Appalachian Voices, and again, I'm Aaron Such from Solar United Neighbors. The webinar is designed to help you understand the barriers that we're facing for solar on schools and government buildings in Appalachian territory and how you can help eliminate them. The webinar itself will be divided into 4 sections. I'm going to cover solar basics and terminology, so talk a little bit about how solar works, as well as some of the concepts we'll be covering. And then Tish Tablan will be speaking of the benefits of solar on schools and government facilities. And then Hannah Coman from Southern Environmental Law Center will speak about some of the specific barriers solar is facing for schools and government facilities in Appalachian Power territory. We will then close out with Chelsea Barnes giving us some action steps on how you can take action. So after each section, we'll have a moment for about 2 or 3 questions. And then at the very end, if we have some space for additional questions and ones that we weren't able to get to, then we can get to that. The webinar aims to be about 55 minutes to an hour. And again, we'd like to just remind you, one of the, the benefits of the current health situation is that we're becoming very familiar with Zoom, but just some basic housekeeping functions. If you have questions, please type them into the chat, and then we will stop after each section and address those questions. So again, it is my pleasure to welcome you, and we're going to go and get started with the first slide. So if you're not familiar with the work of Solar United Neighbors, we are a nonprofit organization that helps communities go solar, join together and connect the movement, and fight for fair solar policies. We work a lot with bulk purchase projects. In fact, started the first bulk purchase project, Solarize Blacksburg in Montgomery County, and have discovered that a lot of our folks that we help go solar on their homes or businesses also want to see solar on their schools or government facilities. So a basic overview of solar and some of the terminology. I have about 3 slides for you, and we all start at different levels of understanding of solar, but I'm going to start from the very basics. So when you're speaking of a solar system on a school or government facility, it's typically divided into 2 technologies. You have solar thermal, which uses the sun's radiation to heat water. That could be for bathing or for cooking. We're not going to focus on that technology. We're going to focus on solar PV or photovoltaic systems, which use the sunlight to produce electricity. And you could think of a solar PV system as a generator with no moving parts, a free source of fuel, and a virtually maintenance-free 25-year lifespan. The systems are measured in kilowatts, and the way that a system would work on a school or government facility is that if you had those panels up on your roof, they're producing electricity, and that electricity is flowing into whatever is using electricity at the time. It could be the computer lab, lights, or HVAC system. And those systems are actually grid tied, meaning that a majority of people may make the mistake to think that solar uses battery backup. Well, majority of the systems right now are grid tied. So whatever's not used at any given instant is essentially turning the meter backwards. And so what that equates to is our main term that we're going to be speaking of is net metering. So net metering is a billing system in which the host site gets full retail credit for energy produced but not used at the time. And it's very common for a solar system to have surpluses during certain times of the day or during certain times of the season. And then those surpluses kind of work like rollover minutes. If you remember that, when cell phones used to do that, they would have a surplus that would be applied to any forthcoming bill. And what that enables is a site like a school or government facility to produce a percentage of their annual production. They're always tied to the grid, so they don't have to produce all or nothing. They can have a system, if they have a small roof, that might produce 40 or 50% of their energy production during the course of the year. And so net metering is a really important incentive. In fact, 99% of the solar systems in Virginia use net metering, whether they're a home, business, or a government facility, and that happens nationwide in Virginia. Also, net metered systems are responsible for a majority of Virginia's solar jobs. That's according to the Solar Foundations. About 2/3 of Virginia's solar jobs are in the installation of net metered solar systems on homes, businesses, schools, and government facilities. So you could think of net metering as something that enables jobs and clean energy for local communities. And because of that, net metering has been expanded in legislation. So Hannah will be speaking to the specifics of that. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to go ahead and discuss power purchase agreements, which we'll be covering today. And you could think of a power purchase agreement as a finance structure that makes solar more accessible to nonprofits. And there's a lot of different models and iterations of the way they work, but the basics is that a tax-paying third-party developer finances, installs, owns, and then maintains a system on the host property. And that host property could be a school, could be a business, could be a government facility. And that host purchases energy from the solar system. And again, there's a lot of different ways that this could be negotiated, but typically it's a predetermined rate. It could be a flat rate, or it could also be variable. It could also have what's called an escalator that might peg a percentage increase every year with the cost of electricity. But typically the term is anywhere from about 10 to 25 years, with the typical rate being potentially about 20 years, but there's a lot of variances. What's important for nonprofits is that the third party monetizes the tax credits and incentives. So right now we have a 26% federal tax credit. We also have an accelerated depreciation modified at accelerated cost recovery system, or the acronym is MACRS. And because that third party pays taxes, has a tax liability, they're able to monetize that, whereas a nonprofit like a school does not. So just with the federal tax credit, they're able to take that 26%, monetize it, and make the project pencil out a little bit better. Again, these power purchase agreements address some of the principal barriers to solar. They're often able to be negotiated with no upfront costs for the host facility, in which they're seeing bill savings from day one. And if you're interested in learning more about power purchase agreement, you can see down below where it's a link, and we can share that at the end of the webinar. But Solar Energy Industry Association, or the National Trade Organization, has a really good page on solar power purchase agreements. And again, a lot of different variations, but that's the way it works. I'd like to end just with the fact that with power purchase agreements and with net metering, going on to the next slide, they really are job drivers. And part of addressing the barriers to solar on some of these public facilities is a desire to create jobs and build more clean energy into Virginia, especially Southwest Virginia. You can see in Arlington, which is the most job dense, Fairfax County, and then Central Virginia. We want to be able to see some of those numbers also start to trickle through Southwest Virginia. But again, it is a pleasure to be here, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tish Tablan, who's going to speak a little bit more about the specific benefits that you'll see with solar on schools. So Tish?
Hi, Aaron. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for that great introduction, Aaron, an overview of solar. So my name is Tish Tablan. I'm the Program Director of Generation 180. We are a national nonprofit organization working to inspire and equip people to take action on clean energy. And I lead our Solar for All Schools campaign, which is providing resources to help schools gain access to the benefits of solar energy. So since we are headquartered in Charlottesville, we're working actively in Virginia, and we produced a report last fall on solar schools in the state, and I'll be sharing some of those findings with you. So as you can see in this slide, there are an array of benefits of solar, pun intended, that local governments and school districts can receive by going solar. So Aaron just talked about job growth as one of the benefits, but there are definitely many more. Going solar will help our state and localities improve resiliency to climate change and also meet greenhouse gas reduction goals. So in Southwest Virginia, the city of Roanoke has greenhouse gas reduction goals. The city of Blacksburg has committed to community-wide greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 80% below their 1990 levels by 2050. Albemarle County, which has some parts of it in Appalachian Power Territory, has set a goal to be net zero emissions by 2050. So going solar is an important way that these localities can reach those goals, and solar on public buildings is an affordable way to do that. So the most obvious win-win for both localities and school districts is that going solar is going to create energy savings. Next slide, please. So as we have found in our research, solar is saving taxpayer dollars and enabling localities to really stretch their budget and reduce operational costs without reducing services provided. So local governments right now are already spending 40% of their expenditures on secondary and elementary education. It's a big part of the budget going to schools. And when schools get that budget, the second highest item on their budget is energy. So looking at energy costs, particularly for schools and localities, is a really important way that we can save taxpayer dollars and help schools and localities do more with the limited budget they have. Okay, next slide. So to reiterate Aaron's explanation of power purchase agreements, it's extremely beneficial for public agencies because you can go solar with no upfront capital costs. So it's no impact to your budget. You don't have to allocate lots of dollars to go solar. You can have a third party, a solar developer, pay for the solar system. They'll operate it, they'll maintain it for the length of the agreement, which is often 20+ years. And then the customer will agree to purchase the electricity, typically at a lower rate than they're paying the utility. So they're going to see instant savings right off the bat. So huge benefits, no upfront cost, instant energy savings. And so we found in our study that 86% of the solar capacity at Virginia's K-12 schools was financed using power purchase agreements. So this is a tested financing mechanism where schools are seeing lots of benefits. So I'll share with you a couple of examples. Next slide, please. So in Middlesex County, which is in the Northern Neck, they became the first 100% solar school district in the state. And they were able to do that because of a power purchase agreement. So you can see in the photo, they installed a 1.9 megawatt system on their facility, and it's shared by both the elementary school and the middle school, which I cropped the photo, but you would see the schools there on the right. So it's a big field just to the left of the schools. And they were able to offset by 100% the energy used by all 3 school buildings in their district. And of course, they're going to be saving $4 million over the next 25 years. So this is a real game changer for them. So in their first year of operation, they're going to see savings of about $60,000. So that's enough to pay for a new teacher just by going solar. And then that savings will increase over time as utility rates, they anticipate utility rates will rise, the savings by comparison will also rise. Okay, next slide. And Arlington Public Schools is another good example. And they've actually utilized 2 different ways for financing solar. And these happen to be the 2 most common ways that we have found that schools are paying for solar. So the first is by power purchase agreement. And in our study, we found that 72% of the capacity is paid of solar capacity nationwide on schools is paid for with power purchase agreements. The next financing mechanism is paid for by bonds, which are usually done with big new construction projects. And then third, right after bonds, is grants, which are getting fewer and fewer. So really, they've utilized 2 different tools. With the power purchase agreement, they just recently, this past year, signed a PPA for 2.5 megawatts on 5 school rooftops. And that agreement, once it's completed and fully installed, they anticipate savings of $4 million over the next 25 years. And then the photo shown on the right is Discovery Elementary School. And they paid for that with a bond. So when they issued a bond for the new construction of Discovery Elementary School, the cost for the solar panels was included in the cost of the building. It is a net positive energy school, so that means they are producing more energy than the school consumes through a combination of energy efficiency, geothermal, and solar. But the cool thing is that this school was actually built under budget. So they did a fully net positive energy school that is netting the school district $100,000 per year just on this one school building. And they're doing that with smart building and the use of solar. So these are 2 great examples of how school districts in our state are saving lots of money by using clean energy. Okay, next slide. And it's not just these 2 school districts, we're really seeing this across the state. So the good news is we've seen an explosion of solar at K-12 schools in Virginia. So just in the last 2 years alone, we've seen the number of schools triple, the number of schools with solar triple from about 29 schools near the end of 2017 to almost 90 schools by the end of 2019. And we've seen the rate of solar capacity grow even faster. That grew tenfold in the last 2 years. And unfortunately, most of this growth was not in Appalachian Power territory. Next slide. So 99% of solar capacity installed at Virginia's K-12 schools is outside of Appalachian Power territory. Most of the growth we're seeing actually has been in Dominion territory, where there's been a pilot program for that allows schools and localities to use power purchase agreements to go solar. So we're seeing over 20 megawatts of solar on 83 schools outside of Appalachian Power territory. So Appalachian Power does have a pilot program that allows power purchase agreements, but only for nonprofit institutions of higher education. So really that has excluded public buildings and school buildings. And as a result, they don't have any customers that are in their pilot program right now. So to put it into context, sorry, one more point. To put it into context, how little 22 kilowatts of solar is for the entire Appalachian Power territory, the newly passed Solar Freedom Bill is now going to allow a homeowner to install 25 kilowatts of solar on your home. So starting in July of this year, I'll be able to put more solar on my house than is currently installed on schools throughout the Appalachian Power territory. So now I'm going to hand over the mic to Hannah Coman with Southern Environmental Law Center, and she will talk more about the policy context in Virginia. Thanks.
Hey, Hannah.
Thanks so much, Tish.
Before you get started, we did have one question come in.
Great.
I think it might be good to answer that now. This could be for Aaron and Tish, both or either of you. The question is, if you don't have a 30-year roof that's solar ready, what options do schools and public buildings have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So definitely solar is recommended for newer roofs. They generally say a good rule of thumb is a roof that's maybe 10 years old, older than 10 years is not a really good candidate for solar because you're going to replace that roof before you replace the solar panels. I know specifically in Virginia, there are solar installers who can roll in the cost of your roof replacement into your power purchase agreement, or you can look at your roof replacement schedule and plan accordingly. So if you already have roof replacements lined up, planned out, you can look at doing solar in line with when you're.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I would just chime in here. What we tell people, if you're going to replace your roof within the next 10 years, it's probably a good idea to go solar after you replace your roof or at the same time, in which you may be able to roll over some of the tax credits for solar into the roof replacement. Hannah?
Great. And I think Hannah might cover some other policy options that might be available in her slide. So Hannah, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks so much. So good afternoon. My name is Hannah Coman, and I am a staff attorney at the Charlottesville office of the Southern Environmental Law Center, known as SELC. SELC is a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting the natural environments and health of the Southeast. For over 30 years, our attorneys have encouraged the expansion of cleaner renewable energy sources, including solar energy. Currently, our regional solar initiative seeks to reduce the impediments to solar, expedite solar development in our region, make solar accessible for all Southerners, and help the Southeast reap the many benefits of solar power, including the economic and environmental benefits. Slide. So this, I'm going to give a little background first. This is a map of the electric service territories across Virginia. In Virginia, we have 3 investor-owned utilities: Dominion, which is there in red, Dominion, which is there in yellow, Appalachian Power Company, which is there in red, and Kentucky Utilities, which does business in Virginia as Old Dominion Power Company, or ODP, in the far southwestern tip of Virginia, and that's the green color. In addition, we have 13 electric cooperatives and quite a few municipalities. Solar policy and energy regulation can be different in the different electric utilities. Therefore, we don't have uniform policies across the state. Depending on where you live in the state, different opportunities to go solar may be available to you. So when we're talking about the customers in APCO's territory, we are referring to the customers who live and do business in that red colored portion of the state. In recent years, there has been growing interest in APCO's territory to go solar. For example, last year, 8 communities in Southwest Virginia obtained a SolSmart designation, which means that these local governments have streamlined regulations and are implementing solar initiatives. The Solar Work Group of Southwest Virginia is currently working to build the projects included in their second commercial scale solar RFP, and have recently issued an RFI for a commercial scale solar development partner. So there's been a growing interest in this area for solar, but there have been some legislative as well as contractual limits that have prevented customers in APCO's territory from going solar. Slide. So the 2020 Virginia legislative session was a big year for energy policy. Some of the legislation here addressed access to solar. This is just a sampling here, that's what's listed, of bills that passed related to renewable energy in the last year in the General Assembly. But today, I'm just going to focus on the Virginia Clean Economy Act and the Solar Freedom Act. Slide. The Virginia Clean Economy Act, or the VCEA, is a monumental piece of legislation. Today, I'm just going to discuss what it changed in terms of net metering and power purchase agreements. And these changes are roughly the same in the VCEA as they are in the Solar Freedom Act. The legislation, VCEA and the Solar Freedom Act, increases the net metering cap in all investor-owned utility territories from 1% to 6% of the utility's adjusted peak load forecast for the previous year. So for APCO, that means that the net metering cap, so every customer that can net meter, has been increased from 40 megawatts for the entire territory to approximately 240 megawatts. In addition, the legislation increases access to power purchase agreements in all investor-owned utility territories. Although some restrictions still remain, the power purchase agreement cap in APCO's territory is now 40 megawatts, up from 7 megawatts previously. The big takeaway here is that these two policies that really enable customers to go solar, namely net metering and power purchase agreements, were expanded legislatively in all investor-owned utilities. And this expansion is something that we've seen as a trend across the state. For example, last year in 2019, the General Assembly passed legislation expanding net metering and power purchase agreements in the electric cooperative territory. However, this legislation applies to jurisdictional customers and does not necessarily apply to the non-jurisdictional customers, also known as the public authorities. Slide. So, what are public authorities? Well, in this context, public authorities are government-owned buildings, such as schools, city halls, wastewater treatment facilities, and they're also referred to as non-jurisdictional customers of the utility. So I will use both public authorities as well as non-jurisdictional customers interchangeably. Public authorities are usually relatively big energy users and have different needs than a typical utility customer like you or me or a local business. In terms of megawatts sold, a rough estimate is that public authorities in APCO's territory make up about 13.6% of APCO's customers on a per customer basis. So when we're talking about energy regulation in Virginia, I need to mention the State Corporation Commission. It's the Public Utility Commission in Virginia and regulates the rates and services of the electric utility monopolies. In other words, they are the umpires here. But the State Corporation Commission only has authority to regulate the rates of the jurisdictional customers. In addition, most of the legislation that is passed in the General Assembly only applies to jurisdictional customers. So since the State Corporation Commission does not regulate the rates, the non-jurisdictional customers or public authorities must negotiate their rates with their utility directly. This is done in different ways in different utilities. For example, in Dominion's territory, the Virginia Energy Purchasing Governmental Association, VEPGA, V-E-P-G-A, represents all of the public authorities in Dominion's territory and negotiates a contract directly with Dominion. This contract is publicly available on the VEPGA website, so it's vepga.org. With a few exceptions, the VEPGA contract explicitly applies the net metering regulations and the power purchase agreement pilot program that's in the Virginia Code and the Virginia Acts of Assembly, respectively, and those apply to the jurisdictional customers. That contract says that they also apply to the non-jurisdictional customers. So this means that if you are a school in Dominion's territory, the recent changes in legislation, namely the increase in net metering and PPA availability, will also apply to you. But this is different in APCO's territory. In APCO's territory, a steering committee called the Virginia Municipal League, Virginia Association of Counties, APCO Steering Committee. So I'll refer to it as the VML-VACO APCO Steering Committee, represents all of the public authorities in APCO's territory and negotiates a contract with APCO. To my knowledge, this contract is not publicly available. However, in order to explain the hurdles that schools are facing in APCO's territory to go solar, a few entities have shared specific provisions relating to net metering. Slide. So the current contract that is in place between APCO and the public authorities is from 2016, and a new contract is currently under negotiation with APCO. The current contract expressly limits the amount of net metered solar projects owned by public authorities to 3 megawatts for the entire territory. To put this in perspective, as Tish stated earlier, Arlington Public Schools has a PPA right now for 2.5 megawatts, which covers only 5 schools. Additionally, Fairfax County recently awarded a solar power purchase agreement contract for the installation of more than 40 megawatts of solar arrays at Fairfax County government, school, and park sites. The current contract also limits power purchase agreements. The first sentence of the net metering provision in the contract states that the net metering is only available to customers who own and operate an eligible renewable fuel generator. This means that a customer could not qualify to net meter if the customer leases the solar facility or is financing the solar facility through a power purchase agreement. I should also point out, though, that in that contract there is a definition for a net metering customer. And there, the term is defined as a customer who owns and operates or contracts with other persons to own or operate, or both, a renewable fuel generator. This language would allow a customer to lease a solar facility or finance a solar facility through a power purchase agreement. However, that language directly conflicts with other language in the contract. So we've heard from solar developers and schools that have been trying to go solar in APCO's territory that APCO has refused to let them use power purchase agreements. A lot has changed in Virginia since 2016, and solar is much more accessible throughout the state, and there's much more interest in solar. But currently, it is clear that this contract, which is in the process of being renegotiated, is preventing communities in APCO's territory from going solar. So I can open it up now for questions, but Chelsea's also next to talk more about what that means. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. We did have a few more questions come in, but I think we'll keep rolling on this topic specifically and circle back to the questions that have come in.
Okay, sounds great.
I will take it from here. So my name is Chelsea Barnes. I'm the New Economy Program Manager for Appalachian Voices. I'm based in Norton, Virginia, down in Wise County in the Coalfield region. If you're not familiar with Appalachian Voices, we are an environmental advocacy organization working in the Appalachian region, specifically in Central Appalachia, and West Virginia, Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, and Tennessee primarily. I work on our New Economy program, which is focused on helping the Coalfield region transition as coal declines and new sources of economic development are needed. So we work with the Solar Work Group of Southwest Virginia that Hannah mentioned a few slides ago. That covers the 7 for the southwest counties of Virginia, working to help use solar energy as an economic catalyst for the region. So we've been working on these issues impacting Appalachian Power and other utilities in Southwest Virginia for a number of years now. Next slide. So as Hannah mentioned, the Virginia Municipal League and the Virginia Association of Counties are currently renegotiating that tariff with Appalachian Power that is limiting solar energy development in the region. So that committee of people who make up that negotiating committee are people from the local governments and the schools in Appalachian Power territory. And remember, that was the region in red on Hannah's map, but we'll also show, I also have a slide that lists out the counties impacted by this, so we can show that towards the end if you don't know whether or not your county is in Appalachian Power territory. And some counties are served by multiple utilities, so it can be a little bit tricky, but we'll help you out. So representatives from local governments are currently working on this, and I will say that they've done a really great job of helping to increase access for solar energy and make sure that rates are low for local governments and schools. So if you want to join up with that committee, if you are a local government official, there is an active group of people working on this that you can join up with. We anticipate that this contract will be negotiated over the next year. I think the contract is up this summer, but just due to how negotiation goes and other distractions that we're all currently facing, we expect that that'll probably take a little bit longer to renegotiate. But it's important to remember that these are restrictions in place from the utility, from Appalachian Power, and they could remove these restrictions and allow schools and local governments to go solar at any time, even though that contract is still being actively negotiated. Next slide. So as I mentioned, if you're on this webinar and you're a local government official or a school board member, there are ways for you to help with this negotiation. Again, that steering committee, VML, VACO, APCO steering committee that Hannah referred to, they've been working on this for years and are really knowledgeable. So definitely don't call them up and tell them they're doing a terrible job, because they're not doing a great job. But we just want to make sure that they have the support and tools that they need in this renegotiation process. And it will help them to know that if you as a local government are interested in going solar, you as a school are interested in going solar, because they need to know how many people in this territory really want to see solar happen, so they can negotiate properly. So you can coordinate with the people that are on that committee, and we can tell you in a couple slides here who's on that committee. You can join the committee if you'd like, though, make sure that you have the time and expertise to do so. And you can just talk to other steering committee members and people from your local government and schools about this issue, and whether or not other schools and local governments have been facing these barriers, and what you'd like to see available for your community. So specifically, what needs to happen in these contracts to make sure that net metering and PPAs are both allowed, which as Tish and Aaron covered really well, are really important to making sure that your school and local government can access solar. The changes that are needed are listed at the bottom of the slide. Say that the contract needs to specifically allow for PPAs by changing the definition of the customer generator and other provisions in the contract to ensure that a customer can contract with other entities to own and operate the system. In other words, you want to make sure that it doesn't require that the school owns the solar panels. And we also need to remove that 3 megawatt cap on net metering, which has pretty much been met, blocking any further net metering projects in the Appalachian Power territory. So next slide. If you're not a local government official or on the school board, you can still help. You can talk to your school board members and county boards, city council members, town managers, mayors, anyone who's kind of involved in the local government sphere, and let them know that you really care about your local government and your schools having access to solar. Make sure that they understand that there are barriers to doing so. Not everyone understands that these barriers exist. They think that if they want to go solar, they can. So make sure that you're helping us spread the word about this issue. We'll make sure that this presentation and the recording are available to you to share. And we also have a petition that we've been sharing around, and I will chat to everyone as soon as I'm done presenting to make sure you have access. You can sign the petition, which basically just communicates to our local government officials and school board members that that people in Appalachian Power Territory want to see their local governments and schools able to access solar. And the request is the same in terms of specific changes to the contract. So again, we want to make sure that the contract allows for power purchase agreements by allowing the schools or local governments to contract with a third party that actually owns the solar panels on their building. And also removing that 3 megawatt cap on net metering. Both of these things are crucial. Next slide. Everyone, local government officials, school board members, and even if you're not involved in local government, you can also continue to be involved with solar advocacy work. So the Solar Work Group of Southwest Virginia has a website where you can sign up to be involved and get email updates, be on calls. We're really focused on the Coalfield region, those 7 counties, but the work that we're working on is applicable across the region. So you can sign up Solar United Neighbors and get involved with their advocacy and Voices as well, which works on broader solar issues across the region. And Generation 180 also has a lot of great resources specifically around schools. You can sign up on their website as well. I think the next slide is the list of the, oh no, this is our questions and discussion section. So I'll open it up. We have a bunch of questions in the queue that I will pass around. But at the bottom here, you'll see a link for the Solar United Neighbors Take Action page for Virginia, and the petition for Appalachian Power is one of the first actions that you'll see. but I'll also share that link directly in the chat box so you can click on it. And Austin, if you'll advance the slide to the slide, this will show the all the current members of the steering committee. And again, we just stress that, these are people who are working really hard to negotiate these tariffs. So make sure that you work with them and not against them, and just let them know that if you care about this issue, that that you want to just let them know that it's something you care about. So with that, I will take a deep breath and leave the slide here for a moment so you can peruse. But I have a bunch of questions in the queue. So I'll back up a little bit to here. A question for Erin and Tish, either one of you. What is the source of energy when the sun is not shining? For a school, I assume.
It's good. It really good question. It really depends on the time. I will tell you that in Appalachian APCO territory, a majority of their generation is coal generation, right? So there is some makeup of natural gas, I think second to coal, and then nuclear, and then some hydro. But yeah, I think it's important also to mention that solar produces power when and where it's needed most. The majority of our energy consumption is during the day, and it's at the distribution level. So that's really important to note, that the local energy really reduces stress on the grid and enables clean energy to be harnessed right in that community. Great question, though.
At the risk of being repetitive, just to clarify, when you're net metering, you're still connected to the grid. You're not going off grid. So it just, the solar that's being used to generate energy is just being used at that time, and then you're using the rest of the energy from the grid other times.
Correct.
Great. So another question, I think this is for Hannah. Do you see the expansion of PACE loans as an excellent expansion for on-site generation and storage? So I think that was another piece of legislation that was enacted this year.
Yes, so I'm not familiar with I'm not an expert on the new legislation that was passed, but my understanding is that each locality then has to adopt PACE regulations to be able to use the PACE regulations. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I'm not in a position to say whether that legislation would really be a good alternative to net metering.
Yeah, and I'll just add that one of the pieces of legislation that was passed allows the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy to hire a contractor to administer PACE programs for localities. So that does make it a lot easier for the local governments to go ahead and use PACE. So I think, assuming that that program is structured well, I do think that it'll be really helpful for people who want to go solar or use energy storage. But that is for commercial entities and not residential entities. So I want to just make that clear. All right, next question does anyone see the advantage of storage with its rapidly declining price as a way around net metering issues? Erin, you want to take that?
Yeah, I can go ahead. I think it's not an either or. I think with storage you'll probably see as it becomes more robust and more utilized, you'll still see connections, but with storage, there is a ton of opportunities coupled with on-site PV or solar. Not only are you able to you do what's called arbitrage. Basically, you can charge when it's cheap and then discharge when it's expensive. And a lot of schools also pay demand charges based on their peak kilowatt draw. So coupling solar with energy storage would be an opportunity in some schools to manage that peak demand and further reduce bills. I think it's a false dichotomy to say that with storage, you're going to completely go off the grid, but I think it's another example where storage can be utilized to help grid services. For example, in Dominion territory, they're doing that with the school buses. So I think if you were to have large-scale solar deployment on schools and on government facilities, you have a lot of stacked benefits. You could have the utility like Appalachian Power dispatch that storage to help support grid functions, but you also have the other benefit of having a battery for resiliency purposes. And schools are typically the area where you're going to see shelter in place. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity, but I would caution against using solar plus storage as an either or to say get off the grid or incorporate it. I think it's a complement to all of it. It's another really good question too. I don't know if anybody else has a response to that one.
I think you covered it, Erin. I think that was a great answer.
And I think this is a kind of follow-up question on that. It sounds like, does the projection for cost savings at schools include the cost of grid energy when the sun is not shining? So yeah, usually these like cost projections for how much a school is going to save does include how much electricity the school continues to use, or whatever building continues to use from the grid, and takes into account projected electricity costs and how they'll change over time, things like that. So yes, it should include that.
Yeah, and I would just briefly add too, it can be charged, it could be size per percentage. You're always thinking solar of annual usage. It could be 40 or 50% with a portion of that coming from the grid in any given instance. So yeah.
Okay. Next question. Would school divisions be required to carry property insurance on the valuation of the solar panels and any supporting equipment? Anybody got an answer to that one?
That's a really good question. I think it's something that you would have, like if it's a PPA, I mean, there's always, insuring the equipment. It depends upon the terms of if it's a PPA or if it's an owned system. So I would punt on that and say you'd have to read within the fine print.
Yeah, I think typically, any improvements to your building would factor into how much insurance that you are required to pay. But given that these, there's a lot of fine print and a lot of mitigating circumstances in all these contracts, it would definitely depend on your insurance carrier and what your local government requires, all of that stuff. So.
I would also suggest maybe talking to other schools that have gone solar. Sorry, Tish, is that what you're going to say?
Tish, you're on mute.
All right, I was on mute. Yes, Hannah, you read my mind. I have the school managers and another school staff that have gone solar and are open to answering questions, really being ambassadors. And I agree, those are the kind of really detailed questions that are important that would be great to make someone who's done it and they can speak to how they handle that in their contracts.
You were a little broken up on that, Tish. I'm not sure if you might be able to just briefly restate the last part.
Yes, if you want to contact me, I can put you in touch with some school district representatives who are happy to talk about answer those specific kind of questions.
Great. Real quick question. Somebody asked, how do you find out who is the VML-VACO steering committee representative for certain counties? So obviously we've got the list up on the screen right now, but it's just an important clarification that not every county has a representative on this committee. It's really kind of a committee of the willing. I don't know exactly how these people were chosen in any specific circumstances, but these are the folks that are engaged or have been engaged in recent months, and not every county has a representative. So the next question is, does Dominion or Appalachian Power allow for remote net metering? Hannah, you want to take that one?
Sure. The short answer is no. There are there are community solar pilot programs that are on the books in terms of legislation in both Dominion and APCO's territory, but neither Dominion nor APCO have programs that are currently in operation. So you can't sign up for community solar right now in either of those territories. New legislation was recently passed in the 2020 General Assembly that allows for a shared solar program. I think that sounds like an interesting potential, like depending on, if what kind of customer you are. It would be open to jurisdictional customers though, and my understanding is that it would not be open to non-jurisdictional customers. Chelsea, do you have anything to add about shared solar and if that could address kind of the virtual net metering option?
Yeah, I mean, community solar would certainly be a great option to help schools and local governments and everyone go solar. So I think it unfortunately isn't available right now in Watch Power territory, but wouldn't it be great if it was?
I have a quick clarification on that too. So check my understanding of virtual net metering, because I know there's a lot of different terminology. It would be for a facility or for a bill payer to get credit from a solar energy array or device that's not located on the properties. Is that your understanding?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have a solar array maybe, a couple miles away, and you could get a proportional bill credit based on what you pay into that, also known as real community solar.
I will add
Yeah.
I will add there is one opportunity that Arlington County Schools had advocated for, and they were able to get essentially virtual net metering within their school district. So let's the credit they have from Discovery Elementary School, they are allowed to grow district. They're not sharing that meter, but I think it's restricted to school districts that own and operate their own. So even for Arlington, it only applies to essentially the credits from Discovery Elementary where they own.
Hey, Tish, I'm going to ask you if you could restate. It sounds like you're breaking up just a little bit on that last part.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is that any better? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Should I start over?
just maybe the take-home message.
Take-home message is if you own or operate your own solar panels in your school district, I know Arlington has advocated for a policy where they can roll over their credits just from facilities where they own and operate. So just at Discovery Elementary, they can roll over their excess credits to other schools, but not for the schools that have a PPA.
Great.
Yeah, there is a program for municipal net energy metering aggregation, which should be available in APCO's territory as well as Dominion's. But to clarify, sorry, one note on that. But to do that, you have to have a solar facility somewhere that's net metered.
Yeah, so I think this next question kind of is related, so I'll let you rephrase the answer to address the question, which is, will municipal systems like the city of Radford, who purchase power from AEP, likely be covered under a PPA net metering rule when or if the changes take place? So the city of Radford is not, has its own kind of municipal utility that gets its power from AEP. So Hannah, can you answer that question, kind of reframe from this question, this standpoint?
Can I make sure I understand the question first? Is the question, since Radford is a municipality, but they buy power from APCO wholesale, would they be impacted by this? Is that the question?
Right.
So the answer is it depends on your wholesale contract with APCO. Some of these wholesale contracts state they have requirements that all of the energy bought or sold by the muni has to come from APCO. there's kind of other clauses like that that could try to limit the potential of Radford to net meter. So you would just have to look at your contract very carefully and try to make sure that it clearly allows you to offset some of the demand that you're buying from APCO with net metered solar facilities. I think Harrisonburg Electric has a contract, and I think, Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, weren't they talking about some of that too, or is that a different matter?
Yeah, I believe so too. But yeah, to just reiterate what you said, it really depends on how they negotiate the terms of that specific contract, because some contracts, at least from what I've seen and experienced, are sole source contracts. So when they negotiate a wholesale power contract, that there are often specific terms that say they can't contract out with another provider, and whether that provider is covered as a as an aggregation or PPA is just depends on the specific terms.
All right. Next question is that Appalachian Power offers customers the option of purchasing renewable energy credits separately instead of purchasing your own system or and net metering. Can anyone speak to the benefits of that option?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. From if you're talking about the green power tariff, there's some mostly I would say disadvantages. First and foremost, it's a 4% premium on what you would pay for retail rate. So it charges renewable energy, which is actually, oftentimes the cheapest energy source, puts a premium on it. And then a lot of those programs, you have to be careful to look at the fine print, because they have renewable energy credits from existing hydropower facilities that are often out of state, or wind facilities that are out of state. So you're really not getting that green energy from the local community. And in many instances, it's not resulting in the development and construction of green energy. So you just have to be really careful on the way that the program is structured.
I just want to put a fine point on that, and this is just the lawyer in me, so I apologize. But there's two kind of different programs that APCO has been offering to jurisdictional customers. One is selling RECs, which is just you buy the renewable energy credit, and it's more of a way to kind of offset your energy use, and that those renewable energy credits can come from anywhere. There's kind of you have to look at the restrictions, like Aaron said. And then there's this 100% renewable energy tariff that you're actually buying, let me make sure my quotes are here, buying renewable energy, 100% renewable energy. And that's 4% premium, and really kind of like an accounting fiction where you're still offsetting your energy use. The electrons from a hydro plant are not miraculously coming to your school. So it's an accounting fiction, but you pay, again, a 4% premium. So all the benefits of net metering that we discussed, such as saving taxpayer dollars, don't apply if you're using the 100% renewable energy tariff or buying additional RECs.
Great, thanks guys. And so I just note that the time is 2 o'clock, or almost 2 o'clock. I could stay on and keep answering some questions a little after the hour. If any of our panelists need to go, I understand. But I'll stay on as long as we still have some people to answer questions. And the recording will be available afterwards. We'll email it out. Right.
Chelsea, I actually thank you for that. I have a quick clarification. I'm looking at the side of the steering committee members. I think it's important just to underline the fact that these are volunteer folks that are helping negotiate this contract on behalf of the municipalities, right? So whenever somebody reaches out, it's just important to, realize that these are folks that are working their hardest to, in these negotiations, and that I think, the real obstacle seems to be Appalachian Power, but I don't know if you have anything to add to that, because it could be confused just to, say, look at these steering committee members and, these are the folks that we need to target.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope I made that clear. Like these are folks that are really working to try to negotiate the best deal possible for the local governments. So we really thank them for the work they're doing and hope that we can help them achieve the goals they want to achieve.
Thank you.
So next, two questions that are kind of related. One is, will AEP allow a PPA if no net metering contract is issued? Hannah, can you take that one?
Well, net metering is kind of the fundamental first step. Net metering allows you to be interconnected to the grid and have solar panels. So to have that interconnection agreement, that's part of your net metering process. So I don't think that kind of in reality, like practically speaking, there is an opportunity to have a PPA without also being net metered. I guess you can have a PPA and be completely off the grid, but that would rarely happen because, again, storage really isn't at the point where we need it to be to facilitate complete off the grid for like a school or a public utility or a public authority. Does anybody want to add to that?
Yeah, so the related question that I was going to wrap into this was, somebody asked if there are any cases where Appalachian Power has worked to negotiate an individual public authority contract with an individual school district to allow for a solar project. So I think this is getting kind of what you're saying, well, addresses a little bit of what you were saying, Hannah. So Appalachian Power, yes, they have stated that they would negotiate separate contracts with individual schools or local government entities that want to go outside of what the current contract allows. But I don't know of any specific cases where that has happened, but they have indicated that they would allow it, or that they would enter into those kind of individual contract negotiations. It could be that you could get, you work with APCO and say, we're not going to net meter, or otherwise negotiate with them to allow for a PPA. But the contract itself doesn't allow for, the current contract in place doesn't allow for PPAs or net metering beyond that 3 megawatt cap. So, that would be something you have to work with them and figure out if the costs outweigh the benefits.
And I would also add to that, an environment of market uncertainty if you're a developer. So the idea is that we can, they say that we can negotiate with individual company or with individual school districts. That for developers is a really hard way to try to do business. To take a look at the, comparing it to Dominion, where you know what your caps are, you know what it is. So, and quite honest, my editorial thought is we hear that a lot. I've heard that, yes, we would negotiate. I've heard that from Appalachian Power, that we're going to look at negotiating. But from a business perspective, that creates, again, a ton of market uncertainty. It's not the way that things, are going to result in the job creation that we need to bring to the territory.
Really great point, Erin. So one of the concerns that has been raised as a question here is that Appalachian Power apparently has kind of suggested that if they allow for more power purchase agreements or net metering, that they'll have to raise rates for our local governments. So I guess, maybe, Hannah, do you want to start by addressing that, since you're most familiar with how the contracts are negotiated?
Sure. So I think that's kind of it's an interesting point. I would really, before kind of addressing it, I think understanding kind of exactly where APCO is coming from and the metrics that they're using behind the reasoning for increasing rates needs to be thoroughly understood. My understanding is that as part of the contract negotiations, APCO is going to be engaging in a cost of service study that then the steering committee is going to have an opportunity to look at. I think that's going to be a very important step and an illuminating step to really understand the reasoning for APCO saying that. You know, I think that is a common refrain that is used by utilities. Though my understanding is that, you know, Dominion has not done that to their public authorities. They have just linked the contract to the legislation. So they've said, hey, the General Assembly makes the rules for these customers as well as the jurisdictional customers when it comes to net metering and power purchase agreements. So I'm not, you know, I would be interested to hear why APCO would have a different position. And then I also think, you know, as I said, a rough estimate is that the public authorities make up around 13% on a per customer basis of APCO's customers. And so I'd be curious if they are going to try to increase the rates for the jurisdictional customers as well, based on that same reasoning, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense that a small minority of customers that are, you know, use taxpayer dollars would have to pay more for energy than the jurisdictional customers. So I think kind of there needs to be more information, and APCO has the burden of proof to make that claim.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we often hear that refrain, but I think the burden of proof is in light of all the benefits that we talked about. You know, energy, you know, local energy in the community, all of the different bill savings, that really it is incumbent on the utility. If there is any sort of issue or cost shift, they have to demonstrate that with data. And my experience is they're really good at repeating the talking point, but they're not really good at demonstrating that talking point and substantiating it with data. So if they're able to do that, fine. But you know, I haven't seen any sort of substantiation.
Great. Thanks. I think one or two more questions here and then we'll wrap up. And these are my favorite questions. So one, and these are related. So one is, why didn't the VCA mandate parity between Appalachian Power and Dominion for local governments? This difference results in inequity. And also, why is the allowance for Appalachian Power different than that for Dominion Energy? So you're speaking my language here. You know, we really worked hard during the legislative session to try to make sure that Appalachian Power and Old Dominion Power receive the same treatment as Dominion Energy, and that the customers in these territories got equal access to solar energy and energy efficiency as customers in Dominion Energy. However, the legislative process was messy, and you know, we didn't get everything that I got a big echo if folks can mute if you're not talking. You know, the legislative process is messy, and unfortunately, that's just the way the final draft ended up. Is that Dominion Energy got a specific carve out for their PPAs that said that half would go to jurisdictional customers and half would go to non-jurisdictional customers. And for whatever reason, in the drafting process, that they didn't do the same thing for Appalachian Power Territory or Old Dominion Power Territory. So you know, it's kind of left to interpretation. You know, we're certainly gonna, Appalachian Voices and the Solar Work Group of Southwest Virginia will keep working really hard, and I'm sure Solar United Neighbors will as well in future legislative sessions to continue to try to advocate for equity across the state and advocating for equal access to solar. And I don't know if that answers the question, but it's the best I got. Will the new next question? Will the new contract be finalized in time for contracting under the 26% ITC? Right now, Appalachian Power has said that they think it'll be fine. The contract will be finalized early next year in 2021. So the answer would be no. But we're hoping that we can help the steering committee negotiate some changes, especially for net metering and PPAs, faster than that.
And I would just quickly add that if it does go into effect in 2021, it steps down to 22%. So it would be 26 this year and then 22%, which is the federal ITC investment tax credit. So you lose 4%.
Okay. And one last question, then we'll just wrap it up here and make sure to send out any other answers via email and make sure everyone has access to the recording and the slides. One last clarifying question is that I'm a bit confused on jurisdictional versus non-jurisdictional customers. Does Appalachian Power limit jurisdictional customer size systems? That's part one. Hannah, you want to take that real quick?
APCO does limit jurisdictional, the size of the solar facility for jurisdictional customers. That is, and that is covered in the BCEA under for net metering. And I believe it is, I don't like to talk unless it's right in front of me. But
So I think it's 3 megawatts.
Well, it can't be more than 25 kilowatts for residential customers, and not more than 3 megawatts for non-residential customers. So those are the size limits for jurisdictional customers in APCO's territory.
And those customers are limited to a 6% net metering cap now. And so the second part of the question is, does the 3 megawatt limit apply only to non-jurisdictional customers? So the 3 megawatt limit that we're talking about when we're talking about these non-jurisdictional customers is an overall cap on net metering, not for individual systems, but only 3 megawatts across the entire service territory for non-jurisdictional customers, which is not much at all, considering that some commercial systems are 3 megawatts or more. So
and that,
go ahead.
Sorry, that cap has been met in APCO's territory. So right now it's not letting any additional programs net meter for public authorities, non-jurisdictional customers.
All right. Any last comments? I think we've had really great discussion and questions. If I missed any questions, I will make sure to respond via email, and we'll make sure that the slides go out and the recording goes out. But any last comments from our panelists?
No, thank you. I thought there were some great questions and discussions. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Morning.